March 13th, 1962. The tank, as they called the Joint Chiefs Conference Room in the Pentagon. Fluorescent lights humming over a mahogany table. Lemnitzer sat at the head. To his left and right sat the highest-ranking officers of the Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines. They had a problem. The Bay of Pigs had collapsed 11 months earlier. Castro was still in Havana. And the Kennedy brothers, in the eyes of these men, had gone soft. The military needed a war, but the public did not want one. So the chiefs decided to manufacture the desire. Not through propaganda alone, not through diplomacy, but through staged bloodshed. The desired resultant, the memo states with clinical detachment, would be to place the United States in the apparent position of suffering. Defensible grievances from a rash and irresponsible government of Cuba. In other words, they would wound the body politic and then point at the scar as proof of the enemy's cruelty. The document carried the code word Northwoods, and buried inside it on page 8 is a line that I will decode fully before this video ends. It concerns astronaut John Glenn, it concerns the Mercury rocket, and it concerns a contingency plan so cold that it reads as if it were drafted in a language other than human. To understand why this was not the work of a rogue general, but the institutional logic of an entire system, you have to follow the money. In 1962, the United States was spending $47.4 billion on major national security programs. The defense budget had swollen. Operation Mongoose, the covert campaign against Castro, was already burning through millions in untraceable cash. Brigadier General Edward Lansdale, the Pentagon's covert action chief, had been given carte blanche to harass, sabotage, and destabilize Cuba. And Lemnitzer knew exactly which levers to pull. He had spent his career navigating the intersection of military command and industrial interest. The defense contractors were waiting. The procurement bureaus were ready. All that was missing was the pretext. So the memo outlines a menu of atrocities disguised as options. We could blow up a US ship in Guantanamo Bay and blame Cuba. They called this a Remember the Maine incident, invoking the 1898 battleship explosion that launched the Spanish-American War. We could sink a boatload of Cubans en route to Florida, the document continues, adding the parenthetical real or simulated, as if the distinction between drowning human beings and pretending to drown them were merely a budget line item. They proposed hijacking civil aircraft. They proposed bombing civilian targets in Miami and Washington. This was not a fantasy scrawled in the margins. This was a typed, formatted, staff-reviewed memorandum. It was bureaucracy in service of butchery. Think about that for a moment. This is the machinery of empire at its most honest. It does not hate you. It simply cannot see you. Consider the unnamed group of college students off on a holiday who appear in the document. The chiefs proposed chartering a civilian airliner, filling it with passengers, flying it over Cuba, and then substituting it with a remote-controlled drone painted with the same tail number. The drone would transmit a mayday call claiming attack by Cuban MiGs. Then it would be blown out of the sky by radio signal. The real passengers would be evacuated at a military base in Florida. The fake passengers would become irrevocable proof of Castro's aggression. Here's the pattern interrupt. We are taught that the military exists to protect American lives. That is the foundational myth. And when President Kennedy rejected the plan 3 days later, Lemnitzer was not court-martialed. He was not stripped of his rank. He was promoted sideways to NATO. The system protected its own. Because Northwoods was not an aberration. It was a prototype. In May of 1963, the Joint Chiefs were still drafting pretext operations. They understood it was treason, they recommended it anyway. I will connect this directly to the John Glenn document in the final act. Let me read to you from the document itself. Stamped Top Secret Special Handling Noforn, signed by Lemnitzer on March 13, 1962. A series of well-coordinated incidents will be planned to take place in and around Guantanamo to give genuine appearance of being done by hostile Cuban forces. The plan calls for friendly Cubans to dress in enemy uniforms, start riots near the main gate, blow up ammunition, fire mortars at the base, and sabotage aircraft. Exploding a few plastic bombs in carefully chosen spots, the arrest of Cuban agents, and the release of prepared documents substantiating Cuban involvement also would be helpful in projecting the idea of an irresponsible government. The duplicate would be substituted. The actual civil aircraft would be converted to a drone. The drone would continue the flight plan. Over Cuba, it would transmit on international distress frequency that it was under attack by MiG aircraft. The transmission would be interrupted by destruction of the aircraft, which will be triggered by radio signal. This would allow international aviation stations to tell the United States what had happened, rather than the US having to sell the incident. The authors were concerned with credibility. They were not concerned with casualties. And then there is the John Glenn contingency. Under a subsection of related Mongoose proposals, the chiefs drafted what they called Operation Dirty Trick. Should the Mercury rocket explode and kill Glenn, the objective would be to provide irrevocable proof that the fault lies with the communists. The cover-up began immediately. When asked in secret Senate hearings, Lemnitzer said he did not. This was perjury. It was finally declassified on November 18, 1997, by the John F. Kennedy Assassination Records Review Board. The board released 1,521 pages of previously secret military records from 1962 to 1964. But the public did not learn of Northwoods until 2001, when investigative journalist James Bamford published Body of Secrets. And then the story died. It was buried under the news cycle, treated as a historical curiosity rather than an institutional confession. Operation Northwoods is not past tense. It is a grammar lesson in how the state speaks. Northwoods reveals the institutional precedent. And who pays? Not the signatories. Lemnitzer retired from NATO in 1969 and walked through the revolving door into the military-industrial complex. He joined the American Security Council, a lobbying group for defense contractors including Lockheed, Boeing, and McDonnell Douglas. Now let me close the three loops I opened. Loop 1, the John Glenn document. Loop 2, the 1963 pretext operations. Loop 3, the modern consequence is the silence itself. Should the Joint Chiefs of Staff acknowledge Northwoods formally, or is historical amnesia just the price of maintaining public trust in the military? Next time, we unseal the erased cables from 1975. Subscribe. The archive is open.